Let me start it off. So a good morning and good evening to all our attendees and panelists. A warm welcome to the session. To give a brief about what the session entails and what this is about. So this is one of the first in the webinar series, the Thought Leadership series that's hosted by Stellium. And interesting conversations are coming your way. The first of its kind, the Tale of Two Chains that you have actually come to attend right now, will be talking about supply chain, exclusively supply chain, what has happened over the past decades to supply chain, how has it evolved over the years, what are the current trends in the supply chain, as well as what to expect in the future. Some of the technologies that has disrupted and enabled the supply chain as well. So we'll be talking more about that. And we have esteemed, seasoned speakers to actually talk about the subject. So to give you a an all-rounded perspective, we have invited industry agnostic panelists, as well as from a client perspective, as well as from a vendor point of view. So this would give you a comprehensive outlook of what are some of the current trends, the challenges supply chain faces right now, the technologies that can remediate it, its adoption potential, and what the future of supply chain looks like. Now, I need to actually give you a little overview on who the speakers are. So we'll start with Phil Short. He served as a marketing CIO for Mars Canada, and which is one of the largest food and pet food manufacturers in the world. He has a tremendous amount of knowledge and comes with a strong client perspective to this conversation. Phil is now working as an independent consultant and helping organizations, including Stellium as well. So we are partnered with Phil also, in our business. So I welcome you, Phil, and I hope to actually hear some of those deep understanding and from your experience on this topic as well.
Yeah,
thank you. Next up is Chakradhar Reddy, fondly named as Casey. So Casey has more than 26 years of experience in cybersecurity, blockchain, and financial services. He's also the founder and CTO of Rubik's Network. He has managed technology investments at various global hedge funds like Nevsky Capital and mutual fund companies like Barings, ABN AMRO, Credit Agricole. I welcome you, sir. It's an industry agnostic kind of perspective that you're going to bring in today, and we would like to hear more about the technology side of things from you.
Thank you, Gayatri, for having me here.
My pleasure. And now comes Rameshwar, who's going to be the moderator of the session as well. So with over 20 years of executive experience in enterprise software industry and in product marketing, product strategy, you name it. He's the head of digital automation at Avaya, and he's also an industry thought leader, a blogger, a speaker in several topics, and he has quite the fan following too. Rameshwar, I welcome you. I'm looking forward to hearing this discussion and you heading this discussion as well.
Sure. Thanks, Gayatri. And first of all, good morning and hope, good evening, wherever you are for the audience. And yeah, so guys, we are talking of supply chain, but, we can't forget India is going through a massive crisis. Let's hope India wins. And let's hope supply chain, the backbone, makes it stronger. So without any further ado, Phil, you being a leader, probably I'll put the spotlight on you. The supply chain has been the backbone of our economy, very well known, but it has never garnered the sexiness what the economy wanted. Fortunately, or I would say unfortunately, the pandemic struck on the backbone and the toilet paper was an epic crisis. We started running out in late March out of rolls, and US is, I was looking at the metrics, US is by far the largest consumer of paper. Could you walk through, how supply chain, which was less glamorous, became sexy and now is looking to be more shiny?
Yeah, it's a really good point. I mean, I think it was taken for granted for so long. Yeah, I mean, it just happened in the background, and yeah, you see the airplanes in the air and the trucks on the road, but the work that has to go on to actually make that work and get the products to the shelves and services and stuff, it's been happening in the background for a long time, and there's been a lot of I guess there's been a lot of computing power and stuff put behind it in the background, in the backbone of this, but it was it really wasn't that sexy. Yeah, like, you know, the sales and marketing and all that kind of stuff within organizations has always been sort of you know, the sexier part of the business, for want of a better word. But I think what's happened is you know, what was happening in the background even before the pandemic and whatever, things have been going global. Yeah, I think everyone knows that. Yeah, we've been, whereas we used to have a supply chain which was smaller in geography, now it's totally global, and the requirements are faster. So this is all sort of happened. It was creeping up on us, I think, anyway, and technology's been evolving over the last little while. Yeah, so I mean, I think what's happened is that sort of you know, that backbone that we all took for granted suddenly came into the spotlight when you get hit with a pandemic, and you know, and I think, you know, sort of mentioned that the ship that blocks the Suez Canal, you know, like suddenly everybody's talking about, well, how am I going to get my widget or toilet paper or whatever? Yeah, so we were sort of stuck in this you know, in this sort of just assumption that things worked, and I think people take for granted the amount of effort and work and the amount of information that's flowing around the world to allow those supply chains to work. So you know, I think you know, there's a lot of stuff that's been going on, and I think now people realize, if you want you know, if you want to know where your products come from, and you know, the ethics of production and that kind of stuff as well, you've got to be able to trust that supply chain. And to do that, you need to bring up the emphasis and bring up the focus on it and put the spotlight on a little bit, you know, a little bit harder. And I think that's where supply chain professionals now are actually coming into their own, because, you know, they're able to do this. That's their job. They make this supply chain work. And I think, you know, I come from a technology background. Yes. I mean, now there didn't used to be, people used to come to me and say, hey, Phil, can we do such and such in technology? And you say, well, I could, but it's going to be really expensive and take a long time. I think those days are now gone. I don't think technology is limiting what we can do. I think it's our ability to put that technology to work in the right places. That's actually the key challenge now. And I think, you know, the supply chain professionals now not only need to understand trucks and boats and warehouses and the logistics and that kind of stuff, they actually need to understand the technology that enables it. So I think you're getting this hybrid sort of person come into supply chain now, and obviously data underpins all of it. So yeah, I don't know if that gave you enough background, Rameshwar, to sort of get going.
That's good, Phil. So, you know, we were traditionally in the brick and the mortar with the fulfillments from Amazon's to the modern generation. Are we seeing a fundamental shift in supply chain, or still the basic supply chain tenants still stay the same?
Yeah, it's a good point. So I think fundamentally, like, you know, the physical supply chain, yeah, it's complicated, and you know, I'm kind of thinking, you know, we call it a chain, but actually it's more of a mesh. Yeah, like, you know, it's not really a chain. I mean, each supplier has multiple suppliers supplying them, and they supply multiple customers. So, you know, you think of it as a chain, but actually it's more than just a chain. So I think you know, the simplicity of it, I think, is you know, it's not, we oversimplify it, I think, when we sort of visualize it sometimes. But I think what you've got is you know, there's now a need to get the visibility and whatever. So I think there are the physical supply chain, you know, it's still products moving in trucks and boats and planes and warehouses going to customers. But I think the ability to trace it, the ability to manage it, manipulate it, adapt it, that's actually what's changing. I think the demands of the current consumer, and maybe it's the, you know, the younger generation, but I don't think it's just a generational thing. I think it's just generally in the you know, the demands of consumers and customers, I think, is becoming higher. As they try to drive down efficiencies and stuff like that, you've got to be able to manage it more effectively. So I think that's really where it is. There's a lot of pressure on effectively running the supply chain these days. And I think for decades and, you know, maybe even centuries, you know, the supply chain was pretty stable. And I think what we've got now is the demands are now forcing us to become more adaptable and more agile.
You know, how can I not talk of Microsoft Satya Nadella's famous statement? You know, the pandemic, what digital transformation we saw in 20 years was brought in 2 months. You know, yep. How did digital transformation impact the supply chain?
Yeah, well, I think the trouble with you know, if it's in the information age, you can change information flow like overnight. Yeah, like you can change information flow. It's very difficult to change product flow on that same scale. So I mean, I think that's, you know, when you sort of talk about, I know the toilet paper thing always comes up as like, how did we run out of toilet paper? Like, you know, what's going on there? And it was the rigidity of the supply chain, and, you know, they had whole factories which were just manufacturing paper products for hotels and industry, and then suddenly everyone was working from home. And it's not that there was a lack of paper; it was in the wrong format. In the supply chains were not adaptable enough to be able to adjust and redistribute. So I mean, I think that's actually probably one of the biggest challenges. Yeah, like it's the changing the physical supply chain is actually takes a little bit longer. And I actually believe, collaboration between partners in the supply chain now is going to become key. And to do that, you've got to be able to trust each other. You've got to have good information, and you've got to be able to exchange that information quickly. So, it's an interesting dynamic at the moment.
That's pretty interesting. Phil, that kind of reminds me is, this pandemic is a warning that you better take Mother Nature seriously. But what I've been reading is these pandemics are going to strike even more fast and furious. We've been in the linear mode of predicting. How do we start? Yes, we came back, but can you touch a little bit about the resiliency and our forecasting models in the supply chain, given in the world where we are?
Yeah, I mean, again, great question. I think, I grew up in a technology environment where, we had ERPs and best of breed systems and stuff, and they used to talk to each other overnight, and timeframes were in weeks and months, and we would plan out. I think, one thing is you've got to shorten lead times between the suppliers. So the more you can shorten supply lead times, then the more adaptable you become anyway. But you can't just take a signal from the market and then just send it down the different parts of the chain to the manufacturing organizations and then ultimately the suppliers to them. You can't do it in a linear way anymore. So what we have to do is we have to get that data from all parts of that supply chain, get it into an environment where we can actually start to do predictive analytics and whatever to not only understand what's going to happen. And again, that's always a guess. Yeah. Like, we never know what's going to happen, but you can work with the best information and apply the best algorithms and whatever to try and sort of decipher what the signals may be telling us. But then it's the ability to adjust the supply chain at all levels without having to go through this linear flow from the marketing people down to the sales people to the demand planners through to the supply planners and then the manufacturing production schedulers, MRP. If you have to go a linear flow down through there, you can't do it quick enough, and you end up with either too much product of one thing or not enough of another thing. So we have to actually be able to adjust this supply chain almost in real time, yeah. So that the signals, the make signal to the factory needs to be based on the very latest information. It can't be stale information anymore. Otherwise, we end up with a lot of inefficiencies and waste in the supply chains.
Oh, that's so you brought up a very interesting point. I will shift a spotlight to Amit. So Amit, our apologies, I don't think you got the due recognition. So Amit, why don't you introduce yourself, Amit? You're on mute, Amit. Amit, you're mute.
Can you guys hear me?
Yeah, perfect.
Yeah, I'm saying I was okay. The excitement is palpable to discuss subject matter. So introduction becomes a little bit irrelevant. But let me quickly introduce. My name is Amit Limay, based out of Detroit, in the industry for last 22 years, predominantly in manufacturing and supply chain, in a consulting capacity, both business as well as system integration. So I will speak to answers or to questions from that vantage point. Rameshwar, you have a question for me?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, Amit, we've heard the industry agnostic of how supply chain became resilient is trying to now be sexy. You are a system integrator. What are the trends that you are seeing? How are you fixing or addressing the challenges of your customer?
Yeah, so supply chain, I think, Phil, you covered it exceedingly well. It's inherently complex. It always has been complex with a lot of physical elements, multi-partner scenarios, both from suppliers, transportation, 3PL, etc. So changing a supply chain has always been tricky and slow moving, and it was a given fact. Executives around the corner always take their sweet time, do a lot of due diligence to change anything in their supply chain. The underlying notion that I keep hearing in manufacturing industry and supply chain industry is, why change it if it's not broken? The problem with that notion with accelerators or key events like pandemic is you can't afford to wait for it to break. You have to be proactive to see what's going to break it and then fix it before it happens. So the entire paradigm shift of transformation that I have seen in the last 1.5 years is this realization has created a lot of action on transformation. And one of the key points that I see every executive wants from supply chain transformation is the ease in decision making. So supply chain executives will typically take a lot of key decisions that will define how their business will do in a 6 months, year to 2 year time frame. And for them to take that right decision, an ability to get correct insights at the right amount of time becomes critical. And that has been, and Phil, you can speak for it, that has been one of the marquee challenges over the years. How do I get access to the right information in right time? You have to actually go seek the information. The information seldom comes to you. So the entire transformation, be it data, be it AI, be it blockchain, that I think Casey will talk about today, is going to be fundamentally rooted to a point saying, how do I make information easily accessible? And how do I make it accessible in a single version of truth fashion? So I would say that.
Yeah, I was going to say, if I could just add on to that. I mean, I think there's too much information out there now, or too much data, I should say. Yeah. So the challenge is, how do you get to the right data? How do you turn it in? How do you get it into information? So contextual data, and then how do you get the insights from it? So I mean, I think that's one of the biggest challenges. Is there's so much data out there now. It's how do you know what's important and what's not important? And I think that's still the skill of the the supply chain management folks. Yeah, like you've got to understand what is actually impacting it, what data matters and what data doesn't matter, because there's just so much now.
Yeah. How do you separate noise from information?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's good. So you both have touched upon a couple of key interesting things. We all agree that technology, or I would say, when I mean technology, it's information, data, security, our backbone for us to be resilient and act much more dynamically. If either of you, perhaps Phil or Amit, could you touch a little bit about how Industry 4.0 is transforming supply chain? Industry 4.0 is nothing but getting connected and tech, a lot of tech, but how is supply chain getting up for Industry 4.0?
Phil, you want to take for sure?
Yeah, I mean, essentially, the ability to model the physical supply chain in the digital world, to adapt it and do what if scenarios around, what if we changed, the parameters of a physical thing before you actually make that decision. So it comes back to the decision making, I think, that Amit was talking about. Yes, how do you get the right information in front of the people making those decisions, and to allow them to make the physical adjustments to the supply chain with some kind of knowledge around what it's going to impact, how it's going to impact it in the end. So Amit, you can probably talk to it better than me, but.
Yeah, so you rightly said, right? There is a buzzword that has been doing circles within manufacturing and supply chain as well. Two buzzwords really. It's digital twin and a digital thread. What essentially it does is it, as Phil was saying, it models your physical environment. A lot of supply chain lives in IT systems today, because every time you receive a good, it gets scanned. You know what goods you scanned, what are you putting away, what are you picking, what are you shipping, and where it stands. But the real impact of making a decision change at a process level, how it will impact on my physical movement of good, whether it's speed, quality, etc., is not known until it happens in reality. And then if it doesn't happen the way you want, changing it back cost time and money, and then a lot of headache and acidity. So the entire notion of digital twin is, what if we create a virtual model in a system, take all the system data that is already there with us virtually, sort of use the IoT and other technologies to model the physical world, which is outside the IT system, bring it into the IT system, and then run what we call what if scenarios. What if I tweak the parameter? What I change this supply chain route? What if I completely change my warehouse network and then maybe consolidate my warehouses? What would happen to the speed of execution and customer experience? And then when you run this entire simulation end to end, you call it digital thread, saying, I start my process here, I end it here, when it delivered to the customer, and when I get paid, this is how my system would work. It would allow you to take better decision faster without the consequences that otherwise you will have to bear.
Yeah. Yes, I think digital twin, at least I've been hearing in the last, thanks to GE, they've been championing the whole digital twin in the IoT 4.0. But yeah, that's a good thing. So, now coming, there's a key part of that, a core component. Today, we want to discuss some of the, what you call the bare facts, the hype, the myth of the foundation, which is the blockchain. Probably, Chakrathar, this is, this is for you. So what would be appreciative is, when, first of all, there are a couple of things you can touch. When we hear blockchain, the first thing comes into everybody's mind is what? Guess what? I won't speak. It goes into the Bitcoin thing. So I'll leave the crypto part of it. But slowly, what we've seen is Ethereum came back and they started talking of the proof of stake and the kind of things. And then they said it's really not sustainable and scalable. Then we came back with the Hyperledger. If we all agree, and we do agree, that blockchain is the way to go forward, why it still is not yet to make its mark? And secondly, when digital twin is there, how do you build a digital identity which is non-hackable? I've actually seen wallets being hacked. So if you could shed some light on what you guys are seeing and how you are trying to be an innovator, that'll be perfect.
Well, thank you, Rameshwar. So we've heard some really good points from you as well as Phil and Amit. I think I particularly liked Phil's idea about the complexities, what he was explaining about the complexities in supply chain, which are often underappreciated at a consumer level or even at a top management level. And also, I think the digital twin idea, the whole can you run what if scenarios with digital twins? And I think that's a very refreshing idea, at least for me. The great possibilities out there. So when you talk about blockchain, and I think, yes, there's a lot of speculation, there's different angles to blockchains, there's cryptocurrencies. And then people said, hey, can we take the underlying technology and use it to solve some of the issues in supply chain or financial services? So private blockchains like Hyperledger and a number of others like Ethereum Enterprise were explored. Even in supply chain, we've seen consortium blockchains being formed by big companies in retail consumer goods. Unfortunately, they haven't moved to a production level for various reasons. But one big problem is, I believe that for a blockchain to be effective, it needs to be really decentralized to get the cost benefits, the security benefits, and the latency benefits. The cutting down the information lag which is there in supply chains. Like many industries, data sits in silos in supply chains. Typically, you have consortiums. The consortiums limit the amount of information that I believe that can be used to really model scenarios much better. So when you use a public blockchain, it not only represents one truth, which is immutable, but it gets you, one of the key aims of what we're trying to do in our blockchain is to bring information about silos, across industries without hurting the confidentiality aspects. Now, yes, Bitcoin, Ethereum, from a cryptocurrency angle, they're doing well, but they have limitations for them to be useful in, to build real world applications like the digital twin Amit was referring to. And this is why we've been building, what we've been building in terms of Rubik's. The other interesting projects are coming up. So this will take time, but I think it will be really useful to do. One area which, we could, maybe we could talk later, but you talk about disruptions, the Suez Canal incident, supply, manufacturers were stuck with wrong products, wrong information. But a key part of the disruption, even before the pandemic and accelerated because of the pandemic, is cybersecurity, particularly the logistics and shipping sector, which is a backbone of, supply chain. was very hard hit because of ransomware attacks. We all know the MICE incident where it took literally 6 months for them to get back their operations back on track. And this is happening because there's not only a lot of data that's generated, but when you have so much data generated and it's all aggregated and centralized, security challenges come up. So another underappreciated area where something like a blockchain could help is to really address the security issue. We talk about information, the immutability of it, the authenticity, the traceability parts. These are all great applications which are being explored, but the security aspect of the data, particularly, it's very important because when your world is running on the fleet of ships or flights which are moving around, the data needs to be available all the time. You can't have ransomware incidents. So there is also an angle of blockchain helping in that area.
Interesting. Actually, there are a number of points you touched. At the very beginning, you said blockchain needs to be decentralized. That's like the whole concept of blockchain is to be decentralized, right? So are we saying that it's on paper, but not on systems? The whole decentralization concept?
Yeah, I think decentralization is difficult to be pulled off technically, but it will be done. I think the primitives are there. The first bunch of projects which you have seen and still seeing have solved some of the problems. And in that way, they're they've shown the direction. The second, third or fourth generation projects that are coming up are really addressing some of the deficiencies of what we've seen in other projects. So we will get there. And I think when you talk about decentralization, it's not just a fad word. Essentially, what you're talking about is data is now stored by enterprises, consumers by themselves securely, still being able to do commerce, share the data around, without losing privacy. And the whole costs of managing that would come down significantly. We often discuss about public clouds, and the champions of public clouds make huge noise about the benefits of it. And there are certainly benefits, but when you really look into it, the costs are also high for enterprises. So I think there are some developments there, which I think would really move us towards more decentralization in a more efficient
manner. A question for Phil. Would blockchain create new business models? Would it be fundamentally different from the traditional business models?
It's a good question. I mean, I think it certainly enhances the business model we have. I mean, one of the things I think there's a desire from a consumer perspective is the whole traceability of where does a product come from. I mean, this becomes just from an ethical standpoint and whatever, decisions are being made on purchases based on where they come from. And I think one of the things I could see the traceability down through the through the supply chain using blockchain or that type of technology. Not only gives the traceability, you then bring in the authenticity as well. Yeah. And I think that's actually one of the things that is sort of key, especially to, organizations that have strong brands. Like, how do you make sure that when the consumer is buying that brand, how do they make sure that it is actually what they're buying? And not only, even if you're buying a brand and it's actually the brand, how do you know that the the manufacturing processes and whatever have been, how do you know that they're ethically sourced? How do you know potentially the carbon footprint of a supply chain or whatever? Yeah, that kind of stuff. I think if you can actually have that traceability back through this, what is a very complex, like I said, it's not really a chain. It's like this sort of mesh network of all these different suppliers and whatever. If you can actually get to the point where you can, I have the vision of going into a store and you pick up the product and you scan the barcode with your phone and it could tell you exactly where everything came from. Yeah. And it would be able to almost give you a carbon number for, for that kind of thing. And I think that's where consumers are wanting to go there. Yeah. I think, I sense that that's where consumers want to go. They want to know what they're buying, where it came from, and was it ethically sourced and all the rest of it. So I don't know if it's going to create new business models per se. I mean, it may well do, but it's certainly going to enhance organizations that can adapt it and use it, I think they're going to become stronger, and you know, their brands will become stronger based on that ability to do traceability and authenticity.
Yeah, actually, I was reading an article about the very same thing. When you told me of traceability, you know, in a pharma world, you know, where, you know, we have the lot number, the batch number of the date. You're right. Actually, the younger generations are, I won't call it younger, the modern generations are asking, show me the carbon footprint. You know, from where is it made? Is it a human rights violation, or what kind of carbon friendly material? So yeah, true. These kind of things, and actually perhaps this is something both you talked about as the traceability, but then Chakrathar, you know, you talked of the digital identity. How can you make the traceability on blockchain easy and affordable? Because, you know, we've done many of these systems, traceability per se, in Oracle and SAPs. Yes, you could go behind the scene and update it. I personally myself have done in the database, so I know what you're talking about. but not now. It's probably 10 years back. So Chakrathar, with the help of blockchain, how can we make the traceability, you know, much more efficient and scalable?
Sure, I think, you know, taking you know, cue from a couple of points Phil mentioned, you know, it's a very interesting and, you know, very useful point. It's not a chain, it's a mesh. So one of the reasons some of the earlier blockchain efforts in consortiums failed, because, you know, you're trying to solve it like the problem like a well-defined chain. What you need to do is really build information, help, you know, store information in a mesh manner. And you do that typically in a decentralized public chain. So imagine that your suppliers can be defined now, but they could be new later. So when you're able to collect this information as the information happens, you know, the scans of the codes, or, you know, where the product has moved from, the different components, and store it in a public ledger, and, you know, authenticate with the decentralized identity. And this becomes immutable. What will really happen is the truth is already stored as it happened. It's not being collected with a deliberate attempt, but these standards are built in. A lot of information is stored, whether it's an IoT with sensors or physically inputted, you know, keyed in data. You know, this information gets recorded as it happens, and therefore it's easy to build, you know, processing on top of that. And so you're really solving that issue. And the other aspect is, when you talk about digital twins, you need to find a good way of mapping the physical goods on the digital world. And there is no effective way right now. There are barcodes in QR codes, but there's security issues, and there are batch codes. So, you know, when you uniquely map these things and link it to the identity of the goods, identity of the users who either prepared those goods, you know, really, you know, everything is there already. And, you know, when you want to really assess, authenticate, you can just pick in from different parts of the mesh and verify. Like organic foods, I think, you know, one of the big issues people have is they pay huge premium for organic goods. And, you know, how do you trace it back to the farms where they come from? So today you trust the retailer, you trust the, you know, restaurant, and you pay a huge premium. Do you need to pay such premiums? So there could be some interesting new business models, if you were to call this. If you're able to, anybody can verify where this good, you know, this item has come from with simple applications. And that should be the goal forward. I think that can be done.
So you actually touched about governance, which is good. Today, there's a trust somewhere. Maybe I trust Amit, maybe not. Maybe I trust Phil. So in the world of decentralized, how do you define trust? Where is the governance? You know, we have the FDI. If the bank is out of, you know, they run out of money, I have FDI govern. In this case, who governs? How is my liability? How am I protected? So could you touch about those? And I know you interestingly brought a new concept of proof of harvest. Perhaps if you touch on that, that'd be great.
Sure. When you're talking about a financial services case, and the trust is there, but the two aspects of the trust. One aspect is, yes, if something happens to your money in a bank, like it's hacked, you could be reimbursed. And different countries have different standards on that. The second aspect of trust is that when you have a money, the issuer of the money, is he doing a good job about it? And are they devaluing about it? So there are different aspects people are discussing about it. When you have a good crypto or blockchain-based system, okay, which should bring down the governance required, and this is not possible in all industries, but in financial services, this is mightily possible. We've seen, sorry, right from the Lehman crisis, financial services is one industry where trust generally gets broken in cycles. And we've seen this time and again. We've just seen Greensill in supply chain invoice financing. You can say in a way supply chain. And we've seen this problem. So I think a good blockchain, a good public ledger would bring automatic governance in this. So you trust the crypto behind it. These are open sourced, code, and they're time tested. They get verified over a period. They become solid. So I think in areas where there's pure information, this is it solves the trust issues. And of course, it depends on how good the chain is, or the mesh is. The mesh probably is the right word, but we got used to blockchain like supply chain. You're talking about what we're trying to do. One big problem is what Ethereum or Bitcoin do today. They bring the kind of trust. You can sleep that in Bitcoin there are only so many tokens, okay, and then somebody is not going to steal unless you lost your private key. But to achieve this, they're burning huge amount of energy, and that's how their game theory, that's how their economics work, and that I think is not desirable in the long run. There are both sides have good arguments about it. This is not desirable. So we have been working on proof of harvest as a way of addressing that issue, taking out some of the limitations. So the reimagining the ledger. So a ledger in a traditional sense is a bank keeping all the entries, or a central bank keeping all the entries, or a DTCC keeping all the stock market custody entries. Now what Bitcoin is doing is these entries are now replicated across the world so that no one node failure can hurt it. And again, going back to this, we believe it should be different. It should be really mesh. Anybody creating data, any IoT device creating data should be able to store on this mesh. And that's what, if you look at what we're trying to do is more like a mesh. And then you have cryptographic primitives really authenticated, make them immutable, and anybody can use this data along with the digital identity.
Yep, good. I think there's a lot more to cover, but obviously we're running. But I'm going to call from next time, Phil and Amit, supply mesh, no more chain. Yep, that's a good one. So yeah, Gayatri, do we open up for questions?
Yes, we don't have any questions at the moment, but we got some interesting polls running as well in the meantime. One of the polls was, what are some of the biggest barrier to transforming your supply chain? And interestingly, people did say that there's nobody to evaluate and suggest a change. And also, the organizational inertia as well. I know that was also kind of like touched upon, but perhaps, spend a couple of minutes talking about that as well.
Yeah, that'll be great, Phil and Amit, both.
Okay, so let me go first this time, Phil. So yes, we can call it an organizational inertia, and every organization is different, but there is a valid reason for that inertia because it's a heartbeat. Supply chain is a heartbeat of a manufacturing organization. If something goes wrong, getting it back on track is a humongous effort. You lose money, you lose profit share, you lose market share. And that's why it is slow. It's like an 18-wheeler. It cannot turn like a Mustang. So there has to be a systematic methodology. One thing to come over that inertia is to create a systematic plan. What we have done with customers is after the assessment is done, we give them two styles of plan, a long range plan of how you make systematic progress every quarter. And what are the transactional things that can be done quickly without a significant risk profile attached to it? but yet it will give you some quick returns, free up some cash in the process, and then that funds your subsequent transformation. So a big, large scale transformation in supply chain will be slow, but we have mechanisms to make it as fast as it can go. Phil,
I think it's a good point. I mean, I think it's not a one, it's not a switch you turn on and off. It's actually an evolution. It's called a transformation for a reason. Yeah, like it's not a change, it's a transformation. So I think you're right. I mean, the way that we've always approached it is you need to have a if you're in your long range planning of an organization, you need to understand and get the best insights you can into what your supply chain needs to look like and how it needs to be organized, and then you sort of back it up to the steps that you can take in the short term. But it's really, what I've always sort of found, you got to actually define the problems. Like, what are the problems that you can solve now, and how can you solve them, and how do you adapt it, but always with the view to getting to that that longer range vision as to where you need to be. So, yeah, I mean, it's you got to define the problem and the benefit of solving that problem, and then that's how you can sort of get the get the buy-in from the senior leaders in an organization. But it is tough because it's a big deal. Like for manufacturing organizations, like supply chain's a big deal. You've got a lot of heavy equipment, you've got a lot of cash tied up in inventory and whatever. So it's it's a big deal. They've got to be confident. So yeah.
Yeah, that's a good. So speaking of inertia, Amit, we should touch about the people skill, the people. There's obviously the logistics, the engineering part of it, and supply chain is by virtue is very bulky. We should touch about people. How do we transform? If we are talking of supply chain transformation, people are the core. How do we address the trends, the technology, the shifts from the people's point?
So upskilling is the name of the game. And whenever upskilling is not possible, obviously, because people have to do their day jobs and there are certain skills that cannot be learned and mastered overnight. You can learn it overnight, but you cannot master them. So experience comes handy. So you should have a people strategy that is carefully calibrated with what all the skills they carry, what all the skills I can upscale and keep them handy, and how I can crowdsource the skills necessary for the transformation. And it needs to be a mixed strategy, and that is the way to go. If you wait for all of your people to get skilled in technology that you need to transformation, you already had missed the bus. The next transformation has already arrived. So it's a catch-up game every time if you wait for all the trainings to kick in, and most of the time, truth be told, that you cannot hire everyone that you want. You'll have a finite amount of budget every time when it comes to people. So the right strategy is first create a transformational plan, understand and identify the technologies that you need, including blockchain, and then use the industry specialist and augment whenever you need them. So that's how I'll put it.
If I could just add on to that, Ramesh, where I think at the senior level, there's the adaptability of leaders to be more collaborative, because I think that's one of the things that the physical walls between organizations have been built up over many years, and I think to actually evolve the supply chain, we've got to sort of break down those. We've talked about breaking down internal silos and doing end-to-end processes and whatever. We need to go end-to-end multiple enterprises now, and I think that's actually a management adjustment of management and leadership to be more trusting and build that sort of trust. And that's where maybe the blockchain potentially may come in to sort of help build some of the trust in the information and whatever. But to me, it's not just that the people executing the process, but it's actually the leadership of that process and the ability to sort of trust end to end and build those sort of relationships. So I just wanted to add that in.
Yeah, sure.
We do have another question. And this is interestingly an adoption question. So with IoT technology being quickly adopted, are you seeing blockchain applications for sensors, trackers, etc., within the supply chain too? So it's more around an adoption. Feel free to answer it.
I don't think I've got much on that one.
Maybe Amit, Casey?
Yeah, so Gayatri, if you could, and Amit could probably answer that, and I can take you from that. But
yeah, Yeah. So the fundamental reason why any technology gets adopted is that if it makes business sense and if there is a purpose behind it, and executives can see clear line between the technology and the problem that they're trying to solve. The reason IoT worked is because it solved that specific problem. It brought the next level of data into the systems that they did not have, and that allowed them to create decision-making models, and then their business sort of got a little easier when it comes to getting the manufacturing traceability, control on quality, etc. For blockchain, the adaptability again lies in the same answer, right? How can it make business sense? If it allows my supply chain to be nimble, change faster, be transparent, be tradable, be flexible, blockchain will get adopted. What it needs though is an executive or a series of executives or a team of executives who know supply chain inherently well and who also know blockchain inherently well. So many times what happens is if I know supply chain exceedingly well, but I'm not necessarily intimately aware of the capabilities of a technology, I can't make that connection. So you really need a team at an organization level who can make that connection and then see the possibilities and then act on it. My belief, and Casey, you can add on, is blockchain has very specific applications in solving some of the supply chain challenges, especially how traditionally run supply chain took a little longer time to respond to the pandemic. Supply chains enabled by blockchain would respond a little faster, in my opinion. But Casey, over to you.
Absolutely. I think as we've seen both from the response perspective because of the disruptions and from a security perspective, supply chains with blockchain integrated would be much better. There is an issue though. I believe that the efforts on supply chain so far have been consortium supply chains by large manufacturers, and I think it would solve some problems. And I think, but more likely, and this would make actually adoption of blockchain difficult in the sense that people want to measure the results, but more likely the direction I see this is going is good public blockchains will be coming up where it's easy for enterprises, consumers, just to log their data, pick up their data, and then you build applications on top of that. So I think it's more likely that way we will happen. So this would take some time, but I think organizations must start building around it now. In 2 to 3 years, we would start seeing, I believe, quite robust efforts, particularly around the traceability is where I think we could see some quick results coming from that. Security is one area, and so I think. We would see some of these areas problems solved more quicker, and the rest of it would follow over time.
Great. Thanks, Amit and Casey, on that insight as well. We don't have any other questions, but I encourage the attendees to reach out to us if you have any more questions for the panelists. Thank you so much to all of you for giving in your perspective, both from the client side, the vendor side, as well as the industry agnostic, the technology side too. I think this was a very interactive and interesting discussion, touching upon some of the new trends that's going on, both from a technology as well as the supply chain side. See, I told you this conversation is going to be interesting, and this is just the beginning of the series too. So we have more discussions coming up in the next month. So we are hoping to actually have in a periodic manner. So every month we'll have new guest speakers come in and bring in their perspective on a new topic. So the next one that's coming up is the Uberization of supply chain. Everyone has heard of Uber. Look it up, come to our webinar. So you'll be getting some invites your way as well. And as I said, feel free to actually reach out to us with any questions, and we'll be more than happy to actually get it answered. A recording of this session will also be available. I'll be sending it out to all the participants as well as panelists too. Just so that, if you want to actually, go back and replay it, and if you have further questions, shoot us an email. Thanks a lot for participating, everybody, and thanks a lot to the panelists, moderator Ramesh as well.
Thank you, Stelium, Gayatri, Phil, Casey, Rameshwar. Let's continue the dialogue.
Yeah.
Yep. All right.
It's been a pleasure speaking to all of you.